Morning, guys. Time for chapters 13 and 14 in Dolls of War. We just left off. They had Christmas, and Macy realized Mama actually sent her a Christmas gift, knowing that she wouldn't be around for next Christmas. And it was her journal that she was writing in. I'm looking. Chapter 13 is kind of a longer chapter, so bear with me. But that probably means lots is going to happen. So here we go. In school, the teachers explained that the town would be holding blackouts for the duration of the war. If the warning siren blew, everybody had to turn out their lights within 60 seconds. Most of your parents are installing blackout curtains, Miss Stewart told Macy's class. Will those let us keep lights on inside the house? Lily asked. Miss Stewart nodded. Blackout curtains won't allow light to pass. She walked around her desk and leaned against it. Each of you must help. It will be your part of the war effort to check every window for your parents to make sure the curtains are tight and that no light comes through along the sides or bottom. Why? Asked a girl in the back who had been whispering to a friend instead of paying attention. One of the boys turned to scowl at her. To keep enemy planes from seeing light and knowing where to drop their bombs, dummy. Are enemy planes coming here? The girl jumped to her feet as if ready to run, but not sure which way to go. Sit down, Amy, Miss Stewart said. We have people watching the skies. No enemy planes have been seen. We mean to be ready, just in case. Mark laughed. Yeah, we don't want to be like Amy, running around calling, What? Where? What am I supposed to do? Miss Stewart made the class stop laughing and take the blackout seriously. It's going to be very, very dark outside, especially when clouds block out the moon. Christopher grinned. Sounds like a good time to go around to girls' windows and make scary noises. Mark laughed. I can already hear them screaming. Again, Miss Stewart called for order. Macy glanced over at Lily, who had become silent and very pale. Don't worry, Lily. Those boys won't have the nerve to go out in the dark to try and scare us. She wasn't sure that was true, but Lily looked relieved, and Macy was determined to be brave. Another girl raised her hand. My dad read in the paper that we might have to paint the White House black so enemy planes won't see it. Mark grinned. They'll have to change its name, too. We'll have to start calling the White House the Black House. Macy asked, Is that true, Miss Stewart? Are they thinking of painting the White House? I've heard that rumor, the teacher answered, but the people in Washington, D.C. don't agree. She glanced around the room. How many of you believe the White House should be painted? Several raised their hands. When Miss Stewart asked how many believed it should be kept white, more hands went up. Leland, she said, you voted for black paint. Why do you think that's a good idea? So enemy planes can't see it. She nodded and asked, Macy, why did you vote to keep it white? There are a lot of white buildings in Washington, the Capitol and others. They represent our country. We should be proud of them and not hide them from anybody. You should hide, a girl said from behind her in a low voice. It sounded like Rachel. Nobody likes you anymore. Macy refused to turn around to see if it was Rachel being mean, but the back of her neck felt tight, as if her skin were braced against possible spitballs. She kept her hands on her desk, even though she wanted to clasp the Kokishi doll she still wore beneath her collar to feel closer to Mama. In a louder voice than usual, Lily said, After the war is over, black paint would be really hard to clean off the white marble. That's a good point, Miss Stewart said, and called the class to order again when everybody started talking. One more thing. The school will be holding a scrap drive. I expect all of you to urge your mothers to save empty tin cans and extra cooking fat. Amy raised her hand. What about the old cannon in the square? It's not good for anything, and it's made of solid metal. Can we donate that? No, the boys exclaimed, while several girls looked horrified. Christopher said, That's part of history. It's from the old fort outside of town, way back from when we were still a territory instead of a state. Northwest Territory, hello. Miss Stewart raised her hand to stop a dozen protests. There are no plans to melt down any of our memorials. Leland said, I'll bet we'll have to if our country gets invaded. For now, we'll leave the old cannon where it is, Miss Stewart said. Please collect whatever scrap metal you can find. In her letters to Mama, Macy began counting the days until Nick would come home on leave after training to be a sailor. Only 10 more days, Mama. Now we only have 9 days to wait until Nick comes home. It's 7 days. 5, 3. Nick came home on leave on a blustery day in early February. Rain slanted into the rail station on gusts of wind while Macy waited with Papa for Nick's train. When one of the gusts carried the lonesome sound of the train whistle, she raced outside onto the platform. Iron wheels screamed down the rails. The engine slowed and cars clattered past, moving more and more slowly. Macy scarcely felt the rain or the wind as she jumped up and down trying to see in each window. Men were crowded into every seat and standing in the aisles. It was impossible to see her brother. The wheels finally ground to a stop. People crowded from inside the station onto the platform, eager to greet returning servicemen. For a moment, Macy didn't recognize the sailor stepping from the train in a white uniform and cap, with the duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Then he saw her and grinned. She ran, shouting to meet him. "Nick! Nick!" He dropped the bag and swept her high. "Hey, sis!" He whirled her around and set her down, marveling. "You weigh almost as much as my sea bag, and you've grown taller. Have I been away so long?" She hugged him, with all the fierce love churning through her. "Yes! I miss you more now than on the day you left." Laughing, he tousled her hair. "You wouldn't want me to hang back and not do my part." He glanced around. "Where's Pop?" "Back there." She stepped away, wiping her eyes. Nick waved before swinging the bag, his sea bag, she reminded herself, onto his shoulder again. Together, they wove through the people still crowding the platform. Papa came to meet them, his hand outstretched. "Welcome home, son. It's good to have you back." Macy couldn't remember ever seeing Papa's whole face light up with a smile like the one he had as he and Nick clasped hands. Hap came home the next day. When he came by to visit, Macy watched him talk with Nick and Papa and saw that Hap and Nick were both changed. Their eyes held a faraway look, as if part of them were already off somewhere fighting the war. That look made her shiver. Mama would have said a goose had crossed her grave. But later, when the sun came out, she walked to the drugstore soda fountain between her brother and Hap. They wore their uniforms, and she felt proud and excited to walk with them. She hoped everyone she knew would see them together, especially the people who hated Miss Tokyo. Nick asked her about that. She tried to make it sound funny, even when her smile wouldn't stay in place. Both Nick and Hap pressed her shoulders and said she was the one in the right. Miss Tokyo had nothing to do with the war. They had such a short time at home, and the days flew by. Hap spent most of his time with his family, and Nick was often over there. Far too soon, they were both at the rail station again, waiting for the train. They couldn't say where they were going, but everyone knew they would soon be fighting in the war. Macy fought back tears and tried to smile. To her surprise, Hap pressed an envelope into her hand. "Happy Valentine's Day," he said, and was caught by friends crowding around to say goodbye. She waited until she was alone at home to open the card and laughed out loud at a picture of a fuzzy dog wearing a helmet and holding up a rifle with a flag hanging from the end. The flag said, "A Valentine Hello." Inside, Hap's writing was kind of scrawly, and she frowned to make it out. "Happy Valentine's Day to a brave girl. I'm counting on you to win the fight at home and take good care of Miss Tokyo for me." Macy pressed the Valentine to her cheek when she saw that Hap had drawn a heart and signed his name inside. "I promise," she told him softly. "Miss Tokyo will be waiting for you when you come home again, Hap. I'll be waiting for you too." It was hard to think about schoolwork with both Nick and Hap gone again, this time not to train, but to fight in the war. When she sat at the table after dinner with her books spread in front of her, Macy couldn't stop studying Papa's map of the world and its colored map pins. All those pins showed where men were fighting in Europe and getting shot or bombed. A shiver ran through her. Blue star flags were in many windows now. Papa said it would just be a matter of time before they saw more gold star flags, like the one for Christopher's Uncle Ray, who had died at Pearl Harbor. Macy jerked to her feet and grabbed a blue painted pin from the box. "This is Nick's ship," she told Miss Rasmussen. She studied the big map on the wall. "I'm going to put it where Nick will be safe." Would that be in the middle of an ocean? Maybe enemies were watching the coastlines. Miss Stewart had talked about shipping lanes. Those would be well known then. The enemy would know them. They might not be safe for Nick. Papa spoke from the doorway. "What are you doing?" Macy stabbed Nick's pin into the ocean near Australia. "This is Nick's ship. I'm putting it where he'll be safe." "You know that won't help Nick. And it makes a joke of my map. His ship is certainly not off the coast of Australia. Take out the pin." Macy didn't budge. "Then where is his ship?" "That information is classified. Frown lines deepened in Papa's forehead. You've seen the posters saying that loose lips sink ships. If people knew where our ships are sailing, word would eventually get back to the enemy. Macy stood in silence for a moment, studying the map with Papa. They'll come home, won't they? Nick and Hap? When the war is over, they'll come home. No one knows ahead of time how any battle will go. Papa gazed at the red and gold map pins he had placed in Europe. A famous Civil War general once said that war is terrible. Macy was pretty sure the general had used stronger language, but it meant the same thing. She looked at Papa, waiting for the answer he hadn't given her. She needed to hear that Nick was coming home. When Papa remained silent, Macy's entire body seemed to tighten, as if pulling away from anything hurtful. Papa wasn't sure Nick and Hap would ever come home. He was like Lily in some ways. He had pretended Mama would get well, but he couldn't pretend now. He couldn't say what wasn't true. Macy used her sleeve to wipe tears from her cheeks. She felt Papa's hand, warm and strong, on her shoulder. I can promise you this much. If at all possible, when this war ends, they'll be on the first ship home. Macy was able to breathe again. Papa still thought that day might come. He pulled out the blue-headed pin. Even if we knew where Nick's ship was, we would not mark a spot on the map. Your friends might tell somebody, and they'd tell somebody, and eventually Nick's location could reach the enemy. Papa dropped the pin into a wooden box on the buffet. The map is not a toy, Macy. Remember that. He gathered some papers from the table and left the room. Macy stared at the map with its tiny hole where her pin had been. Gently, Miss Rasmussen said, He worries about Nick. We all do. That's why I'm keeping Nick safe. Macy located the blue pin, glanced after Papa, then chose a spot off the coast of California and settled Nick's ship firmly in place. There, he's almost home. She sat at the table and opened her history book. Having Nick safe, even if it was kind of pretend, made homework go faster. Chapter 14. Early in the spring, Betsy Oshima and all her family were told to pack what they could into one suitcase each. They were told to board a train and travel to an internment camp in Arizona. Papa explained that anyone with even 1/16th Japanese blood would have to spend the length of the war in a special camp. They'll be safer there, Papa told Macy. Remember how angry people have been about Miss Tokyo? There will be even stronger feelings against the Oshimas. They'll be at risk if they stay on their farm here. Oh my goodness, sorry. That's not right, Macy protested. After Pearl Harbor, when we were all in the schoolyard pretending to shoot Japanese planes, Betsy was right there with us, pretending. She's not from Japan. She was born right here. So were her parents. It's war. A lot of things aren't right. Macy couldn't accept Papa's answer. On the day the Oshimas and other Japanese families were to leave, she walked to the station, wishing she had talked more with the girl, even though Betsy was a year younger. She stood beside a pillar, trying to see Betsy. She wanted to tell her she would miss her. Families crowded the platform, wearing their best clothes and carrying suitcases packed with all they were allowed to take with them. Macy brushed tears from her cheek. They were leaving farms where many had lived their entire lives. Who would care for their crops? Who would feed their chickens and their dogs? Betsy Oshima had a dog. Where was it? Japanese people with worried or sad expressions filed into waiting rail cars. As the train rolled slowly ahead, Macy moved closer to see who was near the windows of one car after another. By the time a fifth car had rolled past, she realized that smudges on the train's sides were from fresh dirt clods. Someone must have been throwing them farther down the track. She didn't have time to see who was doing that. The fifth car carried Betsy in a seat beside a window, looking out with a sad expression. Macy ran even closer, waving her hand so Betsy would see her. The girl leaned near the window. A smile brightened her entire face. She waved just as hard as Macy, pressing against the window to keep in sight longer as the train kept rolling. When Macy wrote to Mama that evening, she told her about the Japanese families sent away on the train, adding, I'm glad I went down to wave goodbye. Nobody else did, except somebody throwing dirt clods. Betsy seemed glad to see me. I still don't understand why she had to go. In early April, Macy located the blue-headed pin in the box where Papa had tossed it again and walked over to the map. Where would be a safe place for Nick today? Maybe he'd like Canada. She pushed the pin high in the north between Canada and Russia. Papa came in as she opened her notebook to begin an essay for her English class. He studied the map, asking, "Where is Nick sailing today?" "Ah, off the coast of Canada. I'm afraid his admiral has a poor understanding of maps." He dropped the blue pin back into the box, but he chuckled. Macy smiled to herself. When Nick left for the war, he had said that she and Papa would become closer with him gone. It was true, but Nick couldn't have known it would happen over a blue-headed map pin. Miss Rasmussen brought Papa coffee to carry over to his desk at the museum, then glanced at Macy's empty essay page. "What does your teacher want you to write about?" "My favorite pet." Macy leaned her cheek on her hand and stared at the paper. "I don't have a pet. Maybe I can write about Miss Tokyo." The housekeeper dried her hands on her ruffle-edged apron and considered. "You must have friends who have a cat or dog or even a goldfish. Why don't you write your essay on what you like about one of those and maybe how you'd treat a pet like that and what you'd call it? There's lots you can write." Macy chewed her pencil, thinking. Luke sauntered in through the back door with a load of firewood. He dropped it into the wood box and grinned at Miss Rasmussen. "Thirsty work." Miss Rasmussen took a clean cup from the dish drainer and poured coffee into it. "Sit down, Luke. Maybe you can give Macy a hand. She needs to write a school essay about a pet." Luke sank into a chair near Macy and sipped the hot coffee. "The Oshima's dog. Now there's a story. They couldn't take it on the train, you know. Had to leave it behind on the farm." "Who's feeding it?" Macy asked. "As it happens, I drove out there a day or so later just to see where that dog might be." "Was it there?" She held her breath. She had wondered about Betsy's dog when the Oshimas had to board the train without it. "Why didn't you bring it here?" "I thought about it." Luke sipped his coffee again, drawing out the story. "The Johnsons' oldest boy was hoeing weeds when I drove in. You know the Johnsons from the next farm south. He said his family's keeping care of the Oshimas' crops for them." Miss Rasmussen said, "I'm glad to hear that. I hope all the interned Japanese have good neighbors caring for their crops." "But what about the dog?" Macy asked. "The dog was with the boy, bouncing around, chasing butterflies. He's staying over at the Johnsons' until his family comes back from the camp." "That's a good story." Macy bent over her paper and began to write. She made a mistake and started to reach for an eraser before she remembered she didn't have one anymore. "Luke, did you know we get all our rubber from the Dutch East Indies?" "Well," he said in his teasing voice, "I didn't think it grew with our strawberries and grapes." "It grows on rubber trees," Macy said, "but the Japanese captured the Dutch East Indies, so now we can't get any more rubber for erasers and stuff." She looked up, her eyes widening. "Erasers are against the law." "The rubber shortage is why Mr. Bradford isn't delivering groceries anymore," Miss Rasmussen said. "He can't get new tires for his truck." Macy looked at the word she had misspelled and carefully drew a line through it. "Your teacher won't think kindly on a messy paper," Luke warned. "She has to. Miss Stewart says not giving erasers to students saves thousands of pounds of rubber for the war effort." Macy studied her paper. "Miss Stewart said she won't mark us down if we cross mistakes out carefully." "We're living in strange times," Luke said. "I heard ladies can't buy nylon or silk stockings anymore. The soldiers need nylon for parachutes and silk for powder bags since it won't cause sparks." "You're well informed," Miss Rasmussen said. Luke grinned. "Ladies are even drawing lines down the backs of their bare legs to look like stocking seams." His grin widened when Miss Rasmussen put on a disapproving expression. Macy wasn't surprised when he kept teasing. "No more twisted seams for you, ladies. That'll be a boon, won't it? Tell you what, Miss R, anytime you want to borrow my calipers to hold a pencil steady, just let me know." "The nerve!" Miss Rasmussen exclaimed. "Talking about ladies' legs in front of a girl." Luke chuckled as he finished his coffee and left. Macy covered her smile with her hand so Miss Rasmussen wouldn't think she was laughing at her. The end. Can you imagine not being able to get erasers? He said this is a weird time that they're living in. We're living in a weird time too. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for staying with me. All right. Talk to you guys soon.